For more than 2 centuries, the American legal system never had to answer a specific question. Can a former president be criminally prosecuted for official acts taken during their time in office? That unbroken streak ended with the events following the 2020 election. A federal grand jury indicted Donald Trump on 4 counts related to his efforts to challenge the election results. In response, his defense argued that the Constitution grants a former president absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for any action performed within the outer perimeter of his official duties. The Supreme Court had previously ruled in Nixon v. Fitzgerald that presidents are immune from civil lawsuits over official acts, reasoning that the threat of financial damages might make a chief executive overly cautious. But criminal prosecution is a much sharper tool. The threat of trial, judgment, and imprisonment carries a far greater deterrent effect than paying civil damages. Faced with this novel situation, the court rejected both extremes. They denied the defense's request for absolute immunity, covering every presidential action. They also rejected the government's position that a former president has zero immunity from criminal law. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts mapped out a new framework. He determined that the scope of presidential power requires a tiered system of immunity, directly tied to the Constitution's separation of powers. This ruling moves the conversation away from political debates. It forces lower courts to treat the indictment as a mechanical sorting exercise, evaluating each allegation based solely on the constitutional function being performed. The court splintered the allegations into 4 functional pillars. First, Justice Department interactions regarding election fraud and replacing the Attorney General. Second, the Vice President pressure campaign. Third and fourth, state official communications, along with the President's January 6th public speeches and social media posts. Each of these 4 pillars must now be processed through the Supreme Court's newly engineered immunity matrix to determine if the conduct can actually be prosecuted. This diagram shows the court's new immunity matrix as a 3-tiered target structure. The center tier represents absolute immunity. This applies whenever a president exercises their conclusive and preclusive constitutional powers, duties assigned exclusively to the executive branch by Article 2. Because these powers are exclusive, the court ruled that Congress cannot criminalize them, and courts cannot review them. A former president is entirely protected from prosecution for actions taken in this core. The middle ring represents presumptive immunity. This covers official acts within the outer perimeter of a president's responsibilities, where authority might be shared with Congress. The space outside the target represents unofficial acts. There is no immunity for private conduct. This tripartite structure is designed to guarantee the vigorous, independent executive envisioned by the framers, while ensuring that the individual holding the office remains answerable to the law for private crimes. Let's run the indictment through this matrix, starting with Pillar 1, the allegations that the president used official power to direct sham election investigations and threatened to remove Justice Department officials. This animation shows the sorting outcome for these allegations. The Justice Department interactions move directly into the center circle, gaining absolute immunity. The reasoning is structural. The executive branch has absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate, and the president has unrestricted power to remove executive officers like the Attorney General. These are exclusive Article 2 functions. The indictment alleges these actions were taken for an improper purpose, but the court concluded that bad motives do not strip the president of exclusive constitutional authority over the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the DOJ. Because these actions fall within the president's conclusive and preclusive authority, they are permanently shielded from criminal prosecution. This entire pillar of the indictment is effectively dismissed. Pillar 2 isolates the conversations where the president pressured the vice president to reject legitimate electoral votes during the January 6th certification. In the matrix, these conversations are sorted into the middle ring. They are deemed presumptively immune. The Constitution requires the president and vice president to maintain close contact to manage the executive branch and ensure continuity of government. Whenever they discuss official responsibilities, they are engaging in official conduct. But presiding over the electoral certification is not an executive function. When the vice president counts those votes, he acts in his Article 1 legislative capacity as president of the Senate. This creates a hurdle for the prosecution. They can only proceed with these charges if they can prove to a judge that applying a criminal prohibition to these conversations poses no danger of intruding on the authority of the executive branch. The sorting process becomes highly granular for Pillars 3 and 4, which cover the interactions with state officials and the public communications on January 6th. The president frequently uses the bully pulpit to speak to the American people on matters of public concern. Because overseeing and addressing the nation is an inherent part of the job, most public communications fall comfortably within the outer perimeter of official responsibilities. However, a president also exists as a private citizen. When speaking strictly as a political candidate or a party leader, the conduct crosses over into an unofficial capacity, stripping away immunity. Separating the two requires an objective analysis of the content, form, and context of each specific statement. Because the Supreme Court acts as a court of final review, not first view, they declined to sort these pillars themselves. They remanded the case, instructing the district court to perform the initial fact-finding. The line between public official and private candidate is now a critical statement-by-statement battlefield that lower courts must navigate to determine what parts of the indictment survive. As lower courts conduct this sorting exercise, they are bound by strict procedural constraints. The first is the motive bar. Trial courts are forbidden from inquiring into the president's motives to determine if an act is unofficial. Additionally, an action cannot be categorized as unofficial simply because it allegedly violates a generally applicable criminal law. The most restrictive rule is the evidentiary shield. Prosecutors cannot introduce testimony or records regarding immune official acts as evidence to help secure a conviction. The majority argued this shield is necessary to protect the presidency. Allowing a jury to scrutinize official acts to prove other charges invites them to second-guess the president's policies and performance, undermining the purpose of immunity. These constraints create a firewall. They severely restrict how a prosecutor can build a case, limiting the available evidence even when charging purely private, unofficial crimes. The district court must now hold rigorous evidentiary hearings to meticulously analyze the remaining allegations. Their mandate is to identify and strip all immune conduct from the indictment entirely. If the trial court denies immunity for a specific act, the former president has the right to an interlocutory appeal. This allows the defense to challenge the ruling immediately, pausing the trial until an appellate court weighs in. The case has transformed into a grueling procedural struggle. Before a jury ever hears the facts of the 2020 election, the court must first map the legal boundaries of the indictment itself. While the majority defined the scope of immunity, Justice Clarence Thomas filed a concurring opinion, highlighting a completely different structural vulnerability in the prosecution. He asked a foundational question: was the office of the special counsel actually established by law, as required by the Constitution? Under the Appointments Clause of Article 2, Section 2, the creation of federal offices is a legislative power. The text explicitly mandates that these positions shall be established by law. Justice Thomas pointed out that while previous special prosecutor statutes existed, they have lapsed. If Congress did not create the current special counsel position by statute, a private citizen cannot wield the power of the federal government to prosecute anyone. This presents a critical threshold issue. The lower courts must answer this procedural question regarding the special counsel's appointment before the immunity analysis even matters, because it threatens the legitimacy of the entire prosecution. Trump v. United States dismantles the assumption that a former president faces general criminal liability. It replaces that assumption with a strict functional model based on the separation of powers. The constraints detailed in this ruling apply equally to all occupants of the Oval Office, regardless of party or policy. The separation of powers now functions as a mechanical shield, defining the literal legal boundaries of the American presidency.